So we're here to talk about Bluetooth. I feel very honoured to be sitting on this chair with all these great people. And Owen and I had a little chat before the event about what we should be talking about. But the first topic to launch at you really is the most basic of all. How was the SIG created?
Without going into the infamous 20-minute Friday meeting where Intel decided they would sponsor this, I had some really bright people working with me in the mobile group, and some of them had just finished. We just finished doing a successful ACPI SIG. And before that, Intel had done the USB SIG. So SIGs, which are special interest groups, to people that don't know what it is, SIG seemed the way to go because the SIG is where a bunch of companies get together, they contribute IP, and it's royalty free, and you can really make things happen in a hurry. So I wandered back to my office and figured out who wasn't actually doing anything. Sure enough, it was Cardac and Ellis.
They're good at that. Yeah.
And so I told them what we thought, whatever it was called back then, what ended up being Bluetooth. But anyway, the low power radio, and why we ought to do it. And I asked them if they would have any time from their current assignments, and I say that euphemistically, to work on it. And what we wanted to do was put together a SIG model and then get lots of disparate industry with competitors in them to all cooperate and throw their IP into this so that we could make it happen. And that was in 97?
97, yeah.
97, because Per and Sven came to Intel, and it was actually Johan's deal, because he called me up and said, have you got a little time? There's something interesting you might want to hear. And so I went over to a meeting. I think it was on Friday afternoon, so I'm not particularly happy I had to work long. And somebody mentioned that we listened to him for 20 minutes, and then we kicked everybody else. I kicked everybody else out of the room, and we had a 5-minute discussion about whether we should do it or not. And got him back in the room and said, okay, we're in. We'll try and commercialize this technology.
Well, okay. We've actually, in my mind, jumped forward a little bit. Who actually invented Bluetooth? What is the answer?
The question is, what is Bluetooth?
Yeah. I think if you said who invented MC-Link, it would be Ericsson, but Bluetooth was much more than that. So it was really the beginning. So, I always credit Sven with he made the CMOS radio. That was it. He opted baseband and everything, but there were contributors all over. I mean, MC-Link and Bluetooth, we started with a very good foundation. We looked at all the radios, and MC-Link was closest to where we wanted to be, and we went from there.
We'll get back to that because Nokia had technology as well.
Yeah, low power.
Well, I was just going to say there were a number of things that happened. And one was ultimately Nokia and Ericsson agreed to cooperate on the radio technology. One of the tricks in putting this thing together was to get the computer companies and so that was the original ones with Toshiba and IBM, who were arch competitors in mobile.
Yeah.
And so we had to get them to cooperate and put their IP into the SIG. We attempted to get Microsoft in, but they didn't want anything to do with that. So at that time, that's another good story. So one of the decisions we made in the mobile group was, fine, we'll do the software ourselves. We don't need them for anything. We did. And then a little while later, they decided they wanted to join. So it was a bunch of companies seeing the value in this and contributing to the SIG, and essentially the technology and then the marketing and all the rest of that came along.
Yeah. There were quite many companies working on this area, like Ericsson, of course, was and Holger's team on Nokia side, and this was not all yet. There were, of course, others, and some of those joined the other forces, like the Homa Rep.
Never to be heard again.
And going through that, in the well-known story that Vince published in his thing, I wrote about when Nachshine came back and said, "Hey, we got to do a SIG, and there's two ways you do a SIG. You take over a SIG, an existing SIG, or you create your own." And creating a SIG is really difficult, and so of course we try to take over one, and we picked this thing called Home RF. And Sven and I met in Toronto, and he went and he talked about MC Link, and I went up and talked about, as Johan used to say, Bizarra, but we had and we had basically we had agreement in our companies that we would support this thing, and then immediately the Intel guys went up there and crucified us, and the Ericsson guys went up there and crucified us, and so Sven and I went on that very famous pub crawl in Toronto. And after that, it was like, obviously we have to form our own SIG.
Yeah.
And so that, because we tried to take over a SIG, and it was obvious that wasn't going to happen. And how many people have heard of Home RF?
If you go back to
How many have Home RF products in their home? Oh, no, okay.
Sorry.
No, no problem.
Yeah, I was just thinking on this one, so that obviously Intel had also a very important role in orchestrating this together, because it's, we discussed here earlier that there was actually, much before this happened, there was actually a connection between Ericsson and Nokia, and there was the discussion on this, on the kind of behind the scenes, but it never led to anything further, but this then pulled everything together.
Well, Steve, you said to me that you set Jim and Simon the target of bringing these initially 5 or 6 companies together, and we're kind of just glossing over the fact that you brought together 2 of the most aggressively competing computer companies and 2 of the most aggressively competing handset companies. I mean, how did you make that work?
Well, a lot of that was, once these guys decided they needed their own SIG, then we had to figure out how to make one. And Nils and, we had to get those 2 companies, and he jumped on it fairly quickly. I remember a trip I went to Japan to get Toshiba to do it, and I had told Sony they could come in later on, and Compaq came in, so we had we got IBM in. That's another story that Jim likes to tell. So we had really the leaders in the communication and computing industry were the first ones we aimed at, and then after that we had to start building up SIGs, and that was Simon and Jim's job. Tell them about your first objectives and key results.
So every time we would get funding, so Steve didn't really know what we were doing. Every 3 months we'd have a review with Steve.
Steve always knew what we were doing.
And we'd say, well, we're doing this, and we're going to get these companies together, and maybe we'll get 10 companies by the end of the year. And Steve would always multiply everything we said by 100. So.
But what was the reaction like when you first went to Toshiba and to IBM and so on and said, we want you to be part of this?
The interesting thing about the technology was, as somebody said earlier, everybody was looking for something like this at that time. And the design that was done was so compelling that with Toshiba, it was almost the same thing as our meeting at Intel. I took the head of the Toshiba computing group outside into a private conference room, and I said, this is what we want to do, we want to do a SIG. And 20 minutes later, we had a handshake on that, and the same thing happened with IBM, because it was such a compelling deal, and it's kind of, they took it on faith that we'd get it done, and then they contributed their IP. And
I think the other thing is understanding, this is 97.
Yeah.
And, I was out there looking for, Steve said, how do we integrate wireless into notebooks? And how do we get to the internet? Because the internet was just starting. And if you think about it, Nokia, Toshiba, and IBM, they wanted to connect their notebooks to the internet. And at that time, there was 802.11, but it was like $3,000 for NIC, and it barely worked. And everyone was looking for a wireless solution. And all of a sudden, we were providing direction on that. And so I think that helped a lot, right? Because that was you heard Andy Grove, he talked about this vision of 1 billion connected computers and stuff, and that was really, well, okay, but even though it's marketing, that was kind of like the big top thing, right?
Clearly Intel identified this need, but who actually made the first contact? Did Ericsson come to Intel? Did Intel reach out to Ericsson?
So the trigger point was the GSM World Congress in '96, where we met and discussed the concept.
Yeah.
So we were familiarizing, so we understood the radio technology was available, and in parallel we were tasked to enable the digital networks for data because we needed the back end. And we had the Mobile Data Initiative. At the peak we had about 200, 300 carriers worldwide signing up to this. So we were trying to enable the network, but we were lacking the connectivity. And as we saw this, we kind of expected to be able to deliver the $5 components in the notebook, in the phone, and solve the problem. So that's the proposition we brought forward to Steve.
And I believe it wasn't that long before you got shipped over to Lund. Jim, how did those meetings go?
That was mid '97.
Phil Lindblom and I went to Lund to do the initial LOI, and I met Orion on his very first day of work. And I met Jaap, and that's kind of when we kind of worked out the details of what we wanted, eventually what would become Bluetooth, you know, what the specs were, and we went over MC-Link, how that worked, and what we'd want to do it, and Jaap said, yeah, we can do all that. And I think we, you know, that's when we first got to know, and that's when I discovered everyone left Sweden at the end of June. Because I wanted to stay the weekend. Oh, that's a beautiful place. And we said, hey, can we extend our stay? And they said, no, we're leaving. But it was, yes, that was the beginning, because, and I think at that point, so when was the Toronto, Sven? Because that was when we decided we actually have to create our own SIG.
Autumn 1997.
Because we tried to go to ORF first.
Yeah, we tried to take over Home RF. Boy, were they a bane in our life. And
Even Ericsson had a Home RF team, which was Anthony Bestwick.
But that meeting was very close to be a stop, full stop, because Intel intended they should have the right to beat us up. And they said, either we do it mutual or we leave it out.
So that actually was in about October of '97 because it was cold, and that was also when you read the book about the Vikings.
yeah, and I came back and
Immediately afterwards, we drew the logo and the man doing this. We thought that'd be cute.
And the Bluetooth SIG never
Name
once
and
said
everything is a
for me.
big story, so let's do that in just a moment. But while all of this initial stuff was going on between these guys, what was happening at Nokia and how are you seeing things?
Well, we had kind of similar initiative and what Ericsson and Asian low power RF, so we had our own development ongoing. And we earlier discussed that Sven was very surprised that we could give up what we had as our own technology so quickly, but I think the whole kind of concept of Bluetooth basically is the interoperability. So basically when you are continuing with totally separate kind of technologies, it's not working together. So it was pretty obvious that you have to agree on something, and I think the Bluetooth technology, MC-Link technology as the baseline is a pretty good technology, so it's very clear to us also that this actually is doing the job very well and very easy to support.
But what we had to do was, Sven and I was in the meeting, I think it was Copenhagen twice, we were in the meeting there. You remember Lund, but I remember Copenhagen. But we were trying to give us enough such that you were agreeing to align with our technology. We couldn't.
Nokia actually took the biggest risk, I think, to move from what they had.
Yeah, but we
And
also
essentially catch
understood
up.
very fast that actually our hardware is actually absolutely capable of running the kind of specifications of MC-Link, so we could very easily move
Once you got
forward.
the RF
And fun fact is actually that at the London conference,
You were
actually
playing
the
Worm.
technology which we were showing was the low power RF.
Yeah. So at the launch we had a demo and it wasn't quite Bluetooth.
Yeah, and I remember one of the very early demos that I was showing. I had 2 laptops and I was transmitting a file from one to the other, and that was showing it on the big screen. And then at that time it was very early hardware, no error correction software, no nothing. So it was, I demonstrated, I said to the audience that now when I take this one, I walk a bit further away. you'll start seeing errors there on the display. And so it happened. I said that, oh, don't worry, there will be the error correction protocol, everything. so this is not going to happen, but it's a real connection between
And you guys had a demo where you had two phones that were playing Snake against each other.
That was fun.
So we used the Nokia technology to launch MC Link.
Yes.
Well, this is the first page of the first issue of Insider, and we published it in 1998. And what I struggled to get my head around at that point was that one of these points we made, one is Bluetooth, but free IPR. I mean, did everybody agree to that straight away?
Everybody agreed to it, but I wouldn't say straight away.
Who had the biggest problem?
I was fired because I let the IP be free. But it is. I was fired for an hour or so.
So it's a very interesting thing. So this is where the computer and the communications industry were very different. In the communications industry, everything was licensed, and of course they, like in the GSM, I guess they had problems with Qualcomm, who patented all this stuff and sued everyone. But in the computer industry, you had an open IPR policy, and then you developed a standard on the technology so that it would improve the product you put it in. And then, you throw in the IPR and everyone uses it and it becomes very big. And that was our model. It was a very successful model, even though other computer industries like IEEE works on a licensing basis. But, we heard them talk about ultra wideband, and that's where it breaks down, right? Because there, the technology wasn't based off whether it was good or not. It was submitted because they had IPRs on it, and then they pushed to get it in. And so, in the Bluetooth SIG, I like to tell a lot of people is, when technology came in, everyone looked at it, and if it was crap, it was crap. If it was good, it was good. And if it was good, it went in because everyone knew that you were going to donate the IPRs for that. And so it was, in getting engineers to work together, the open IPR is a wonderful way, and it's a very cooperative way. On the other hand, you don't end up making a lot of money off the technology.
But it was not always so kind of, we met people who, if you remember this word, that IP vacuum cleaner. So some years they were not so easy to convince that this is the right
thing. Just to your managers, just sign here, don't read.
Well, the communications industry had a very difficult time with the concept of open IPR, but again, it's hard to argue with the results.
Right? Some lawyers too. You remember during the signing IBM, lawyers said, over my dead body.
You're right.
So one of the things that happened was the first 4 people came in pretty easily, and then IBM wasn't in yet because their lawyers got in the way, but their lawyers got in the way of everything that you were doing. But he did a very clever thing. What did you do? Tell him.
Well, everyone thinks I'm like this brilliant negotiator, but I had negotiated with IBM for, 4 or 5 months, and I was convinced they weren't going to sign it, and so I printed out the contracts without their name on it.
In Raleigh.
And Raleigh, North Carolina, and this VP, so Johan and I were there, and Simon was off smoozing at a party he had for his mobile data initiative. And we were there, and the VP of IBM, Sanchez, comes up and says, Jim, I noticed that IBM's name's not on this. And Johan's look at it, you're like, you're so fired. And I'm like, holy crap, I'm so fired. What am I going to do? And I said, oh, okay, just tell him the truth. I've been negotiating with your lawyer in good faith for 3 or 4 months, and he said he's never going to sign this. And the lawyer was standing next to him, and he looked at Sanchez and says, yeah, we're never going to sign this thing. And he says, Jim, wait a minute. And he takes him and he goes into this Ericsson office, conference room, and all of a sudden we hear this screaming. And Johan looks at me and he says, Jim, you are so fired. I mean, IBM was like our #1 customer. They had an organization in Intel that only dealt with IBM, right? They were our biggest customer. And this screaming went on for 7 minutes, 8 minutes.
Long time.
And they came out, and their lawyer was just beet red. And the VP said, Jim, you know, we decided that after all, we're going to go ahead and sign this. Go ahead and put our name on this and reprint it out. I said, sure. You know, and so I printed it again, and I don't know if you want to tell the other bit of the story about Carl Silverman, but
That's quite all right.
yeah,
Tonight over beer.
yeah, Tonight Over Beer's ass bit involves Gordon Moore, so it's a very interesting story.
No, don't tell us. But I brought it up because, so IBM came in, so we got the first ones that we want in. And it became such a badge of honor that they were the founding members of the SIG, that that's when we had to create that second level. Remember you had to create a second level of people to come in as associates or something like that?
Yeah,
That paid a lot of money.
That was mostly to solve our money problems. Even though we had very great VP executive support, the money wasn't necessarily there all the time.
But did OpenIPR actually keep anybody out that you wanted to have in?
No.
No?
Qualcomm, we had people that would threaten us.
Lucent was visiting us in Lund, I think 3 times.
Yeah.
And first time there was like 10 people in the SIG, second time there was 200 people in the SIG, and third time there was 1,000 people, and we said, sue them.
So
they gave up.
So Qualcomm tried to force their way into the SIG as a promoter. And I know they contacted you. I mean, I literally got a call from a VP at Microsoft because Irwin Jacobs called Bill Gates and said, I want to be Qualcomm wants to be a promoter in the Bluetooth SIG, how can you help us do this? And he yelled at Harold Kadesh, and Harold Kadesh called me up personally saying, hey, how do I get in? I'm sitting like, hey, Microsoft's not even a promoter. When you guys agree to be a promoter, then come talk to me.
Who dragged me down to Qualcomm?
Yeah, we were on the same flight.
Yeah, I had to go to Qualcomm, and I had Jacobs and his kid in Jacobs' office telling me, the CEO of Qualcomm, telling me that I needed to let them in the SIG. And I said no. And that was the end of that meeting.
Can I just say, isn't it nice that we're in a situation now where nobody's in a job where they have to worry about talking about this stuff anymore?
But it was really Anders that killed Homer F. And you know why? You gave away probably a lot of Matt's phones at the conference in Atlanta, was it, right?
Oh, Atlanta, Georgia, yeah.
So everybody got a mobile phone at the Atlanta.
They got 2.
Even 2, yeah.
One chocolate.
No, one real one.
One chocolate from Nokia. and that what happened was that when we had a London event, it was the next event, were we 4,000 people or something like that? It was just everybody expected a phone, so they came to the conference.
But that was LA, I think.
Yeah, a lot of people. And Ben Manny, who was heading the Homer F, we made him the first speaker on that conference.
Yeah.
He had a keynote,
Yeah.
and he stood up. He was about to talk about Homer F on the Bluetooth team. These 4,000 people, and he said, "Wow, I've never spoken to this many people ever in my life." And there was a big roar in the crowd, and Homer F was basically dead after that.
Then he said, thank you for coming to hear about Homer F.
But it was not so clear because it's. I think there was a lot of fight, and they were. Of course, Bluetooth was always ahead, but still they were doing quite okay. And I think Nokia,
they had Microsoft and they had HP.
And Nokia was a company who was not in home RF, and I remember that our managers came to ask us that should we join? Is it kind of too risky to be outside? And I think that it's just
let's talk about Microsoft. They've been mentioned a few times. Mr. Gates' name has been mentioned. You wanted them in from the start, they weren't in from the start. How did the whole Microsoft situation play out?
Well, we wanted them in for the start. They were working on their own stuff. We figured we needed them because, you know, that Windows distribution was where we were going to get all this stuff. And we also expected that they would write the software for it. And that's, as I said earlier, that's they decided that they didn't want to come in. I don't remember if it was because of the IP issue or because they were doing their own, you know, trying to do their own wireless product.
Well, I actually have perspective on
Go
that.
ahead.
They basically said that, and it goes back to when we did the USB standard, and this is computer nerd stuff, but Intel generated this universal host controller interface, and then Compaq and everyone else generated the open host controller interface, and Microsoft had to write 2 bus drivers for each controller, and for Microsoft, that's about $1 million a year supporting those drivers. And so they were like, they only wanted one wireless standard, and they thought for sure Home RF was going to beat Bluetooth. And so they didn't join, and they thought them not joining would kill it. But when it didn't kill it, and they realized that there was this other thing called 802.11, and that Bluetooth was different, then they wanted to join, and we allowed them to join at a huge cost.
That was after they saw the Dibblehauser video. Orion showed them. So.
But they weren't a promoter company.
The first time around, right. But the second time around,
I mean, I think there was a lot of meetings with, you had of course had a lot of meetings with Microsoft. Also Ericsson had a lot of meetings with Ericsson. You met with...
Yeah, I showed the Dibblehauser video.
Yes.
From Mr. Gates.
Yes, from Jason.
And I know there's been a lot of work done before, but he was in, Gates was launching Windows 2000 in Malmö actually. And I was promised a 15 minutes talk to him, most likely because he was willing to join, because we had quite a lot of member companies. But then last minute, the Swedish Minister of Trade, he got my 15-minute slot. Pagrotsky. Yeah. So, but they promised me to get to ask a question to where all the audience was in place, and I asked this question, and Bill Gates answered this very, very positively around it. He hadn't got it fully correct, but he talked positively about it, and I thought that's great. And I called Microsoft the day after and asked for the video on this sequence, and I got that. I remember it's 30 megabytes of data. It was huge at that time. And then I told everybody I knew around me and other people in the city, send this to Microsoft. So they then it took another couple of weeks, and then they were next. Most likely not because of this, but as an anecdote.
well, the CE guys wanted to do it, but the Home RF guys there were blocking it.
Yeah, exactly.
But there was a lot of skepticism also in the SIG about Microsoft joining.
Yes.
And I remember your famous quote, you probably can't remember, that you said that actually it's much better to have Microsoft in and pissing out.
I would never say anything like that.
So did Microsoft go on to be a valuable and useful member?
Yeah, I mean, the relationship that Mike Weirs and Simon had with us, they were like best of friends.
I'm sensing there's some history there.
Later on also Mike Foley, I think he did a very good job to keep everything together. Because there was this phase where interoperability was an issue. I think there was a lot of focus on getting that fixed, and I think that actually saved a lot of Bluetooth success.
One thing about them is that they do very good engineering, and so when they commit to do interoperability and make something work, it's a big contribution. I think.
We did have an argument because they wanted to reuse the IRDA stack, and we were like, no, we're not going to do that. We want our own bus driver, which allows us to basically connect to anything and connect to any of the classic drivers. But when we convinced them of that, then I think we were good.
There's marketing people in the audience.
Yes.
You're going to confuse them.
Well, I mean, you can think of it like if they would have did what they did, Bluetooth would have worked like IRDA. How many here have had a great experience with IRDA?
How many know what IRDA is?
Exactly. And so that was the thing we did not want to happen.
So you had technology by this point. You've got an organisation to take that technology forward, and you're getting members coming on board at a fairly rapid rate. What's everybody worried about at this stage? Were the fears? What were people concerned might not go right?
How much the launch was going to cost?
I think we were, it was a very busy, we were so focused on the next task ahead, we really didn't think, where's it going, which direction do we need to take it. We had, Steve gave us instructions, we need 100 people, we need an open lightning contract, Ericsson and Nokia to work together, and IBM and Toshiba, and then just sign up more and more companies, which is the snowball of the Open IP contract, because the more people that join, everyone who joined is signing the same contract. So, and that gave the security that this is the right technology.
I would say that is the success of it.
Yeah.
You look at it from the big picture, the put in your IP and get everything, because you get an evergreen, which is huge.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other thing is, while we were doing this, Sven and I sat and we did the program management thing and broke out all the tasks, and it was like, oh, we're using the ISM band, except the ISM band isn't international, so we had this task of making it international. We had security, but then you had like the USA NSA wouldn't allow us to export 64-bit encryption, and so we had to go and change those laws, and then the ISM band wasn't universal in Europe, and there was no EU.
French
We had to
military.
go country by country.
French military.
French military.
I remember that. And Japanese, they had it reserved for other purposes.
And so it was, so when you ask that question, it's just like there were so many
Everything
problems
possible.
that we had to address. We had to we started building a structure of a SIG to address all of those issues. And then we also had to write a spec so that, an interface spec that would allow people to build this in a standards way. And then the other thing, remember the huge issue we had with testing interoperability, we had to do these ISO 9000 things where we could build the test vectors in a way that wasn't relevant. What do you call it? It's there's no conflict of interest with a promoter company. With a other user of it could use it, right? So that you can say Ericsson say, Qualcomm's using that. Okay, we're going to block them from using those test vectors. It was those kinds of things, and so building up. One of the very complex. This was an extremely complex program. We had a lot of fun with the marketing stuff, but it was really, really, when you look at all the things that we were doing, every week we'd review the ISM harmonization. 106 countries. We went through them one by one.
The love story with FAA.
Yeah.
Jack Strickler going around, and every airplane on Earth he'd go and he built a 2.4 gigahertz jammer to prove that the avionics wouldn't be interfered with, right? and
So just a point on Jeff, so he came to the promoter meeting and he said, I need an airplane.
Commercial, yes.
Someone, volunteer, I'll go get you an airplane. So that was actually what allows Wi-Fi and Bluetooth to use on airplanes today. If you notice when we flew here, you can turn off all your devices, but you can leave your Bluetooth device on. And that was just one of the little tasks that...
Well, you were dealing with a lot of stuff that was not only technically challenging, but also legally challenging as well. So a lot of this must have been covered by the main SIG contract. And how was that put together? And what was the legal structure of the SIG at this time?
well, when we did the contracts, I don't think we had worked through the entire thing of what we were. I don't think we totally understood what we got ourselves into, right? With all the stuff we had
That's
to
why
do.
there were 3 appendices. You had to sign 18 signatures every contract.
It was. I think about like meeting with all the test equipment people and getting them to start building, because one of the differences, it was really interesting merging, right? Because when the computer industry did something, we would do plug fests, and everyone would bring their stuff in and test it, and it would work. Well, with radio, you couldn't really do that, right? You needed like really expensive test equipment that would go and run all these tests and say it works or it doesn't work, right? And And that was new for us, and so these guys are teaching us that, and we're teaching them how to do, you know, USB used to do Plug Fest. If you remember, we did Unplug Fest.
Which I was banned from attending.
Yeah, and so you know, if you really look at it, as far as SIGs and everything, we were really pioneering. I mean, everyone copies the things that we did. But it was, I mean, there's not a lot of people up here that don't have gray hair. It was really, really complex.
Those test house certification, I think they were the only ones who made money, right?
Mostly from us.
And then Jim, of course, glossed over the marketing task of explaining this thing to the world and coming.
Right, well, let's come back to let's start at the beginning of the marketing story with the name. Let's get that out in the open. Jim, do you want to tell that one?
I think it's common knowledge.
Is it? Well, yeah.
Kind of. Sven and I did the pub crawl, and I came back to my house, and I had bought this book, The Vikings. I opened up, and there was the Herald Bluetooth Stone, and I said, Bluetooth, that's just a hilarious name. And I wasn't trying to be insulting to the Danish, you know, and I just thought, this would be hilarious, and I took the stone, I outlined it, you know, with a Sharpie marker, and that's the one you saw there, and I went to Simon, I said, we should, this guy, and I said, Sven and I went to this thing, and, you know, he talked about MC-Link, and I talked about BizRF, and it was confusing everyone. So we need a common name, and I think we should call it Bluetooth. And he said, that's a stupid name. There's no way we were going to call it Bluetooth. And I showed him the runic stone, and the guy had outlined, he said, oh, that's pretty good. Can you put a cell phone and notebook in his hands? And I sketched in that, and he says, oh, that's good. That's brilliant. And we were like, can you imagine Andy Grove or Bill Gates having to say the word Bluetooth? Wouldn't that be hilarious?
But remember, it was a code name.
It was a code name.
But there is also a side story to that, because in one chapter of the
longboats.
Exactly. The
longboats.
Yeah. There is Horror Bluetooth has a feast. He has a party, but before you're allowed to go into this party, you have to sort out your problems. And we thought that was also a good culture, because we had a lot of different interests. So if you were in the group, we were allowed to say anything to each other, because that was needed. But afterwards, we always had a big beer.
We had a dinner.
To sort out.
I think we definitely had a culture. And
Yes.
I mean, everyone's best of friends.
In the beginning, we called ourselves the Bluetooth group.
Yeah.
That was a SIG meeting groups.
Yeah, that was
But marketing was going to come up with a real name. And as the story goes, right, I mean, Ericsson liked the word flirt, getting close but not touching. And
Close connection without the touch.
okay. And well, anyway, so it was a code name, and I had done a trademark search, and Sven still has the email where I sent our lawyer, and we were going back and forth, and he says, you have to name it after a river or a mountain in North America. And I was lying to him and said, no, you know, it's a small town in Germany. No, you can't do that. And we were going back and forth, and finally I said, look, you know, we're working with Ericsson and Nokia, they don't have the same stupid rules we do. Just do a trademark search. And he was like the lead negotiator for Intel, so I thought he was, you know, he was going to come down and kill me. And 2 weeks later, I get this email, and it said, surprise, surprise.
It says,
no one
surprise, no problem with Bluetooth.
And so I had done a trademark search, and then that December in Lund, when we went to sign the LOIs, because, you know, we all agreed about what we wanted to do, I stood up there with Simon, and we had Johan come and bring, you know, I said, get some Bluetooth shirts and bring them in. We'll give them to everyone. We're going to tell everyone that we're going to have this code name, Bluetooth. And I went up there and I said, okay, we can't continue with Nokia calling this low power RF and Ericsson calling this MC-Link and us calling this BizRF. So we're going to have a code name. The code name is Bluetooth. There's all this talking going on. All of a sudden, it was just, you could have heard a pin drop. And then Simon stands up and says, but the marketing group's going to pick the real name. And then you hear these conversations about flirt and Omigo and Orchestra, and that was it. And
So how much do we think of a difference the name made to Bluetooth? Would Bluetooth have been the success it is
Well,
today
when I asked
without a
the-
stupid name?
I want to ask the
like,
PR guy. I want to ask the newspaper guy. What do you think?
I think having a silly name was very important for Bluetooth. Yeah. It's made it very memorable. And,
Which silly name?
I think it would have been 802.
How many kilos of rocks for the press conferences did we ship?
I don't remember, but many.
But wasn't it so that that time that quite many names were different acronyms? There's the PCMCIA and everything like that. No one really knew what they actually meant. So
Yeah.
So in retrospect, so I went to, I was doing a marketing job and I went to corporate info marketing about how do you create a brand and a name. So they gave me a lesson on generics that can have meaning, but you can't own them. But it's we could have called it low power art or something. Yeah, so you can do something in between, like some numbers or something where they're sort of generic symbols which you still can't own, but you could sort of have some identity that you can create. And then finally, a fully fanciful name where you actually have to create a name and the meaning, and they said, don't do that, it's impossible.
Well, you spend billions of dollars trying to create the brand name association. It's just never worth it.
So, so then in retrospect, Bluetooth was just the cute king, and we thought that was cool, and everyone hated it, so we said that's the one we're going to use. And Jim and I loved it I hated it for about a minute, and then I loved it.
Was it universally accepted by the promoters? All of
No, we had to
We didn't even get approval from Intel to do this, right? We said, well, how are we going to get Nachstein's approval? He says, well, he's gone on a business trip. We'll lay a slide with the name on it and the runic stone. We'll lay it on his chair. And if he calls us up and says not to do it, then we won't do it. But we'll just assume he approves if he does nothing. And I'm pretty sure the secretary cleaned his chair off.
But then Anders got involved in registering it around the world, and after the launch. So it turns out that Blue and Tooth are two very generic words that we put together. It's fanciful, so people can remember it very easily. So it was brilliant. But
Well, tell them about the marketing study you guys did. And Mexico City.
it was so. And we doing our job. We did some focus group studies before launching. Okay, what does Bluetooth mean to you? And what did we get at? As we had
dental
teeth.
What do you think of when you hear this? Do you think of high technology, other?
So it clearly was a fanciful name. We validated that. I think we did Mexico and Japan and somewhere in Africa or something.
And everyone hated it, except Mexico. Mexico loved it. So if you want naming thing, go to Mexico, they know.
They know that thing.
So when I was talking to Ian last week before we came out here, he was telling me that the Lucent story was quite interesting. What happened with Lucent and royalty issues and stuff?
Yeah, and then Per and Niels was on that discussion as well, but they were claiming that they had very strong patents that they wanted to royalty for.
But we know that Hedy Lamarr had the key patent that we did, so we didn't have to worry, right?
Yeah, but they were trying to negotiate quite hard and get some money.
That must have been interesting because they also wanted to be part of the organisation at the same time, didn't they? So how was that all resolved?
They in the end of the day, they became adopters.
No, promoters.
Oh yeah, promoters in the very end. Yeah, that's correct.
They basically said, make us a promoter or we're going to sue the hell out of you.
Exactly. but it started with they came to us in the very early days, and then they came back, and then there were more people in the SIG. And the last time that they visited us in Lund, at least, we were 1,000 people in the SIG, and then we said, if you want to sue everybody and be unfriendly with everybody, please do. And then it was quiet, but then they became promoters. That's great.
Did they? Because I'm not aware that they did. Did they contribute a lot once they were on board?
No, I wouldn't say.
A lot of our Japanese partners came and told us how to deal with the Japanese, and it turned out that they didn't want to insult the government, and so they didn't do what they said, and so we talked about, and we said, okay, let's try this thing then. And same thing with the French thing, it's like, oh, we don't want to do what Steve Jobs did. How else are we going to do this? And so we were always, it was, you know, and I guess us all being like engineers and stuff didn't hurt, because everything was problem solving. And I think the Open IPR does do that.
Definitely.
You're not there about trying to make money off the technology, you just want to use the best technology.
We have a sharing mindset instead of
sharing mindset.
protecting mindset.
Yeah.
But Lucent didn't contribute.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
What else you got?
A moment ago we touched on something which has been a puzzle to me for all the time I've been tracking Bluetooth. We were talking high data rates a moment ago. Why did Bluetooth never get a high-speed solution, especially after our friend Mr. Edlund talked to us on camera about aligning with the Y-Media Alliance? Why was it all left to the Wi-Fi Alliance to look after that part of the market?
Well, from my opinion, one of the reasons that Bluetooth was attractive was that it's very low power.
Yeah.
It was, you know, back then a megabit was pretty good, right?
Yeah.
The range was fine. I mean, for what we wanted to do, it was very good. And at the very beginning of Starlink, you can't just go megabit, it has to be faster, but then you look at the curve that would take the power up, and that would exhaust the batteries on whatever you were doing. So the whole idea was to keep it so that it was very friendly, very power friendly, and that's what they did.
Well, and I think the other thing is, when you start looking at why I want to transfer things, you look at the applications. 95% of the applitions, 1 megabit per second was fine. And then when we hit 3, we were more than fine.
Yeah,
so the printer was like 300 kilobits per second. MPEG movies and stuff like that, 300-400 streaming, and that wasn't going to change because you're over the internet, and so and all the modems were that. So it just turned out that in the computer industry, they wanted the best thing, and that's the thing that always helped us against home RF or 802.11 when they try to compete in our space is, they want to go as far as possible, which is high power, and they want to go as fast as possible, which is high power, and we were this very low power, and Sven and I were talking about this last night, when we talked about the first CMOS spec, I was showing our radio guys, he says, you can't build a 2.4 gigahertz radio on bulk CMOS, and I showed him our specs, he goes, yeah, but that's not a radio. But that was the point, is that Bluetooth wasn't about building the best radio, it was about building a good enough radio to do what we wanted to do.
And that whole $5 target thing.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same. So it's the low cost as well.
Because if we want, one of the things we talked about when we got this thing going was it had to be really cheap because it had to be in everything. And so we set a goal. I don't know, we pulled it out of the air someplace, but at some point in time, something you had to be able to buy one for $5.
But the Y-Media, I think, didn't fall apart for that reason. It was simply an IPR protection issue. The owners didn't want to give it away for free, so that's why it fell apart.
It was on the IEEE IPRs where you submitted it and then other people had to do royalties, and it was literally a fight between two different design architectures, and they never resolved it. And some of my good friends who were architects that were working on it, I was sitting there, it was the management of the group. I mean, we had very, I like saying that when we signed the LOI, we wrote exactly what we wanted this to be. And so when we had arguments, it wasn't about, what the architecture should be. We never revisited it. It was like, how do we move forward towards our goals, right? And we were arguing about that. And those are good arguments, right? And these guys were arguing about, I want to do this versus this because then I'm going to make a lot of money by milking all the people, and the standard is going to make you do this, right? And they never reached critical mass. That if you look at it today, there are still two of those radios, they have never gone anywhere, right? One of them ended up being wireless USB that they were trying to convince, trying to compete with us. And I remember the spec came on my desk and they said, well, are you going to reject this? And I said, I don't need to. It's going to reject itself. I mean, they did everything they could to make this a super high power spec, and I think they sold 100 radios or something, and it died within a year.
And maybe you will notice this, but the real success is going the other way around.
Yeah.
Lower power,
Really low power.
Well, yeah, I mean,
That's the key.
that move to bring Wybury and demonstrated that the SIG was prepared to adopt different radio technologies and embrace different concepts in order to expand the Bluetooth brand, which I felt could have worked the other way as well.
But at some point you lose
Obviously,
the product
again, the
identity.
market has settled down. Wi-Fi is Wi-Fi, Bluetooth is Bluetooth. But
If you lose your product identity and you start to expand in all the different directions, I think it's more likely that you're losing. So if you know what the identity is of the product, then you follow that and improve and increase the...
Thank you very right, Oliver.
The other thing that I think a lot of people ignore is we went and Bluetooth became, we created the 802.15 working group, and then 802.15.1 was Bluetooth. And basically I allowed them to change the headers and footers and nothing else. And so all of a sudden we had an IEEE Bluetooth spec that was royalty free. And why was that important? Because a lot of large companies, especially Japanese companies, unless it was an international standard and IEEE was, even though they weren't an IEC type standard, they were considered good enough because the computer industry used it, and that helped us too, because a lot of people didn't want to use a standard that was developed by a special interest group. So I think that also gave us a lot of legitimacy. And then when you talk about the coexistence, we took all those and put them in IEEE standards. I think the coexistence was 802.15.4, right, or 3, or yeah. But you know, so we were always very publicly saying that we were addressing these issues with 802.11. We weren't fighting them, even though they might have thought we were. We weren't. I mean, they really. It took the computer industry a very long time to understand the fact that we're a wire. But my mother understood that right away. I said, it's a wire without a wire. You know, but the 802.11, the computer industry, they couldn't really understand anything beyond a wireless LAN. They thought everything should act like that, you know, so.
And over the course of the time that Bluetooth was developed and became the success that it is, how important were the working groups? Seems to have been a very active part of the SIG, a very important part of the SIG.
It was a huge activity.
Yeah.
Well, they're called working group.
Because they work.
They really did.
There's a lot of all the work that is basically carried out in the working groups, all the
Yeah.
specifications, all the technical discussions.
And that structure was in place very early, which is
Yeah.
very good, even before.
And
Even before.
It's a structure that other groups are modeling from us.
Coffee or water.
Yeah, I just want to throw one last question out there. All of these other SIGs and forums and so on all want to be Bluetooth. Why has Bluetooth succeeded and none of them have succeeded in the same way when they've all modelled themselves on what you did?
I think
What was it about Bluetooth that made this difference?
The passion, the people.
I think it was the people. We got along very good. And we had a lot of trust for each other. And
I know, it was the marketing, I think.
Yeah.
the fact that the program management group helped the marketing group.
Hopefully it solved the problem, I guess.
The fact that we had a marketing group is differentiating.
You know, from my point of view, I agree with what Jim said. It was the people. It's not just the people here. It's all people in the audience, everybody working on it. But everybody just kind of got it and saw that this was something that was needed, and it was ground that had never been tapped. And so things got made up as they went along, and people tried things and they didn't work, and then they tried something else, and they had the working groups to talk about. The way everybody got along from company to company was pretty amazing. And I think that's set a tone that kept the whole thing going, at least as long as I was, totally actively involved in it, because, they come in and say, this is happening, but we're talking to Sven about this, or we're doing this, and he's telling them, go solve the problem, let me know what happens. And they would. And then there'd be some new problem, and they'd solve that.
Was it just then, as you said, the right bunch of people came together? Because, you're all largely in competing companies, but just work together.
Yeah, but I would say that even though they joked about marketing, marketing did an excellent job with conferences in the beginning. All the people that came, like the 4,000 people in London, and it was like almost a religion at that time.
Did you see the parties they went to? I never got it. They'd come back and tell me, oh yes, we had a really good meeting. 3 months later, I'd see them driving a Maserati or whatever, living in an ice cave or something like that.
It was a blue Ferrari.
We can close, I guess, really, but I mean, I've
one more comment. I think one thing is also important. We had a great leader.
I think you had a number of great leaders, and basically you did a good job. Well done, guys.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a little history here. We wrote this song like 20 years ago and we performed it in the House of Blues.